I have had the privilege of knowing one half of our featured guest couple for probably, man, I don't know, 30-ish years or so. I had hair back at that time. That's all I can remember. And when Ben Collins was just a kid and he was spending his summers in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan working at a place called Hiawatha Youth Camp. And my goodness, how the address books have changed since then. Because today, as we connect with Ben and his lovely wife, Suzi, they are in Thailand, of all places. And they are serving as missionaries in Thailand. And what a story about how they went from here to there and what's happened since they got there. And so with that, I say good morning to Ben and Suzi. For those of you watching the video, you can see their smiles in their home there in Bangkok, right? Where are you?
Yep, right in Bangkok.
And it still blows my mind that you call Bangkok, Thailand, your home. I know you're used to it because that's where it's been home for how long?
10 years in last October.
Yeah, oh man. So for Suzi, 7 years because you went and brought her back there.
It did work like that.
Well,
we went back and then came back.
Let's kind of lay out the story of how, Ben, let's start with you, how family history and a calling that you feel led you from America, from Michigan, all around the country, and then over to the other side of the world. How did that happen?
So it's kind of a generational story. My mom's parents were missionaries in Bangladesh for 30 plus years. So my mom grew up there, spent a lot of time there. And when she met my dad in college, they went on a trip back to Bangladesh and my dad fell in love with it. So they were missionaries there for a little over 12 years or so. So I should have been born in Bangladesh. I gave my mom problems. So I was born in Michigan, but went back when I was a couple months old, and I grew up in Bangladesh till I was 8. And so I kind of, I guess, grew up with the idea that I could live anywhere. I didn't think I was from a small town that I had, my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were all from. So kind of thought I could end up anywhere, and wasn't thinking necessarily missions when I was young. I wanted to be a marine biologist. I'd always answer the tests in elementary school to make sure I was a marine biologist. And then it wasn't until later high school, early college, when I was working on staff at Hiawatha, and every Tuesday, every Thursday, just hearing, give God the blank sheet of your life, give him the first at bat, in your life. And I'd known before that was where my dad made a similar decision for lifelong missions. And so that's kind of where I first said, I want to do that. I think I can. And I realized we only have one life to live. And so let's move in that direction. I was at college thinking, I'm just looking for an opportunity. I really want to live this way. And it was my sophomore year that I met a guy from ABWE, our missions organization, who was moving to Thailand. So I just asked him to lunch one day and said, what are you doing in Thailand? Do you need help? And he shared with me his vision for Thailand. And I was like, sounds good. I'm all in. So my prayer from sophomore year of college was, God, this is a good opportunity. It matches with how I think you've made me. And I'd love to go and just change my direction if that's not where you want me. And so I graduated 2 years later and joined the missions organization. And I spent about 2 years raising support. I was only, I was 22 at the time. So I spent a couple years raising support and headed out to Thailand when I was 24. So.
Well, a few things I want to dig into before we continue and get Suzi's side of this story. One is there are a lot of people in the audience here for the Big Impact that don't have a background of faith, and so they're maybe a little confused by some of the terminology or some parts of the story. So let me back up. First of all, the only other person in the history of my lifetime that I've heard that dreamed of being a marine biologist was George Costanza. So that's about it. So that's a very unique, original dream that you had. Number two, there is a youth camp in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan called Hiawatha Youth Camp. I've spent most every summer of my life there. I met my wife there, served on staff, and I'm a member of the board there. And that's what Ben is referring to because back in his teenage years, the director and the founder of the camp, Billy Walker, on Tuesdays and Thursday evenings during your week at camp, his messages, his sermons would be directed towards a commitment of your life to following your faith, to following Christ. And that's what Ben was referring to. And I can't begin to tell you folks how many men and women around the world are serving as full-time missionaries or in some full-time ministry capacity because of what happened there on a Tuesday or a Thursday night in their week of their summer or summers at camp. So that's kind of a little background to what Ben's referring to, and it's a powerful background that a lot of us can relate to, but certainly not everybody, especially those listening on the radio who are like, what is he talking about Hiawatha for? That's the name of a forest. Well, it is. It's in the middle of the forest, but I digress. All right, Suzi, how did you end up in Thailand?
Oh man. Well, my story is very different than Ben's. I went to the same university as Ben, but 5 years after him. And I got my degree in early childhood education. So when I was interested in becoming a teacher, I thought about being a teacher in America, and I could see that happening, but I really had more of a desire to be a teacher overseas. And I wasn't really sure where I wanted to teach, but when I was in college, I spent a little bit of time in China, and I loved the Asian culture. I just thought it was, I don't know, I really enjoyed it. And I started just looking for opportunities in Asia, and particularly with people groups that didn't know about Jesus really at all. And I ended up getting a job here in Thailand, and I had an acquaintance with Ben in college. And I was kind of interested in, not kind of, I was very interested in him, but he had absolutely no interest in me. And I moved out to Bangkok and started teaching here at an international school. I taught elementary and loved it. And for 4 years, I was interested in Ben, and he was not interested in me at all. So we knew each other because there's only so many Christians in Bangkok. There's really not that many. We knew each other, but he was very clear with me that he would never be interested in me. He said that.
Ben, what's going on here?
I can admit when I'm wrong, okay? I can admit when I'm wrong.
So yeah, through a series of fortunate events for me, he changed his mind, and we got married and in 2017, and then we are pregnant with our third child now, so we moved pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so Ben, people want to know, our audience wants to know what changed the game for you?
Oh man, what changed the game for me? Okay, when I first met Suzi back in college, she was dating a friend of mine. Okay, so that's where I was just like, oh, it's a girlfriend of my friend. So
fair enough.
That was it. And then we started communicating when she was asking me about what life in Thailand was like and living here. And so I've answered questions like that before, just answering back and forth, old school email. And she made it very clear that she was interested in me. Very, very clear. And so I said, I've been only in Thailand for a couple of years at that point. I was still kind of getting my bearings and stuff. So I said, thanks for being straight up. I'll be straight up with you. I don't see that happening. But if you come to Thailand, I'm happy to introduce you to people and hope you have a great life in ministry and things. And she came out, said, let me know her feelings hadn't changed. So I kind of knew that she was interested from when she first came out. So I kind of wanted to protect her a bit and kind of keep her at arm's length in a sense. And so I that was what the 4 years was. But in the back of my mind, I was noting, okay, she's serious. She's a real deal. Wants to be in Thailand and loves people. And there's so much about it, but I never wanted to let her know that at the time. So I built up this kind of wall in my mind of how it needed to be. Okay, maybe if she moves on and we were just friends, it comes naturally, then something could happen. And I think time went by, and it just got to the point where I had to say, look, that's not going to happen. And what if I just went for it anyway. And when I asked that question for the first time, said it out loud and said, look, there's all these things I just was holding on to that, oh, I wanted it to happen, you know, naturally as friends first. And then when I said, you know, what if I didn't do that? And then the whole thing just came tumbling down. I said, oh, yes. And so I'd gone away for like 3 days. I was praying and spending time with a friend. And then I came back and had, you know, just kind of stepped over this, what I thought was a huge wall. And it was really just a brick or something really small, something really small that you step over. And from there, it was all in.
Well, I'm glad to see that. Glad to hear that. And your family is growing, as you said. And at the same time, for both of you, I would think that concept, Ben, of stepping over an obstacle or stepping over some sort of a barrier kind of plays a bit of a theme in what's happened in your life in general. I mean, it had to take a little bit of courage and a little bit of bravery to step over the barrier that says, okay, all right, now I said I wanted to do this, and now I'm going to do this. I'm going to live in Thailand. I'm going to live in Bangladesh. I'm going to move my family and raise my family there, where now I certainly understand, because I know your family. Your parents and your extended family were like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. This is what we do. But I'm wondering if there were other people outside of your family who kind of looked at you sideways, like, are you really sure, Ben, that you want to do this? Did you encounter any of that sort of obstacle?
I had very few, actually. I would say, blessed to have a lot of examples. My parents' closest friends and a lot of our family members have done missions before. And so from my inner circle, I had really there was nothing like that. I had some close friends at the time. I have one guy in particular, I would hang out. He had a clothing store. He's an artist, had a clothing store, and I would just help him out at his shop. So, but he knew I was going to Thailand. He's like, come on, man, just stay here and help me out. You know, Jesus has enough people around the world, doesn't he? Like, why can't you just stay here? And there was some voices like that, but
wasn't there someone who thought it was a bad financial decision for you?
Oh yeah. There was somebody who's like, you know, you're gonna get paid in dollars, but you're moving overseas, and the dollar's gonna go down. You're in trouble. You're gonna run out of money. And I had a couple of things like that, but it was pretty few and far between. I actually felt quite supported by those that were closest to me. Suzi has I would say a bit of a different story.
Well, my story is different.
Let's dig into Suzi's story in just a quick moment. I've got to take a quick break. We'll come back with what led Suzi and the obstacles she has to overcome to be in Bangladesh, raising a family, and we'll get to that part of the story next on The Big Impact. We are visiting with Ben and Suzi Collins here on The Big Impact, and they are in Thailand serving as missionaries. And as I mentioned at the outset of the program, I've had the privilege of knowing Ben for quite some time. And hearing the story, I've been able to follow, my family follows their family through Facebook, and all the things that have transpired, including some real serious moments and crises here in just the last few months that we'll get into momentarily. But first, Suzi, let's kind of trace your challenges in making the decision and agreeing with the decision to do this, to live in Thailand, to raise a family in Thailand as opposed to America. So you were about to tell us before the break, and I'll let you pick it up from here.
Okay. Yeah, I think my story is a bit different because Ben went through a long process of support raising, and for me, I came out here as a career. So I never really had any worries about money and things like that in the same way he did, but I did have some relational things that I had to overcome before I came to Thailand. I had been in a pretty bad depression, and it had left me feeling kind of disconnected from a lot of my close relationships that I had. And I would say that that was a long process of rebuilding while I was over here my first few years. And maybe a huge obstacle to overcome that was a lot different than Ben's, because Ben is super relational. I'm way more of an introvert. It's harder for me to reach out to people and stuff, but Ben is very relational, has great relationships with people around him. And for me, being separated from family and friends, and having to work through those kind of things while I was in Thailand was a struggle. But yeah, I'm thankful that God brought me through it. And I feel even now in the last few years, I'm glad I went through that time of kind of relational brokenness at the beginning of me being in Thailand, because it's enriched my life now and helped me know what true love and good relationships can bring to I don't know, just how it can enrich your life and totally change your life, that community that's built. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you put it that way, because the change to your life is the part of the story that you probably never focused on. You went there to change other people's lives. And
Right.
it reminds us again that there is a benefit to serving others that those who are truly serving others don't focus on. I mean, to me, that's the unique part. So you didn't go there to get something out of it. You went there to follow a calling and to hopefully make an impact in the lives of other people. And so, Ben, if you could share with our audience exactly what is it that you're doing there? Why did you go there, and what is the goal of your mission work in Thailand?
Yeah. Man, okay. I'm here because in Thailand, there's less than 0.5% Christian in a country of 75 plus million people. Like I said, in college, I was going through a period where I was like, life is really short. We have one life to live. What are we going to do with it? What's really of value? And so I really came to the end of I was studying business at the time, and I was in classes talking about here's how to interview for jobs, this and that. And I was just like, none of this is touching my heart. And then
Not that businesses missions isn't important.
Absolutely. Yeah. But just personally, it wasn't speaking to my heart. And I think I read a couple of articles that just said, consider the need of the world, consider your gifts and abilities, how God has created you, what relationships, what experiences do you have? And so for me, the reason I'm here is because I want to tell people about Jesus. I want to see people come to know Jesus. I want to see them deepen in their faith and have an experience of being comfortable in their own skin as Christians, that it's not a religious system of rules and laws that we take on, but it's a true relationship that transforms us, but even in the most simple of ways. And so just through, a smile, a kind word, those kinds of things, but also through sharing the gospel with people, telling them, who is Jesus? What did he teach? And allowing people to grow in that and to be able to live out their own faith in a way that makes sense, because I truly don't believe, I believe that Christianity covers over cultures, over languages, over all those kinds of barriers. And so that's what I want to see. I want to see people's lives transformed through the love and the hope and just really the message of value that we have as created beings by God, and to see people escape to use almost some Buddhist language, to escape the cycle, that we have of this tired life that we're just trying to get ahead, but we never actually feel rested. And where does true rest come from? Where does true love come from? Those kinds of things is to be. I teach. So I'm at a center where I teach English. We use that. It's a Christian center, and we also have some events that we share the gospel and do some Bible classes and things. But really, to be open, say, hey, we're here. If you want to know more, you can come and talk to us, and our door is open all the time.
Between the two countries, between the two cultures, what was the reception like for an American couple coming in there and trying to really insert yourself into the community? Resistance, acceptance, what was it like at the beginning? You're old veterans now, but at some point you were new.
Well, at the beginning, it's actually kind of easy because you're still new at the language, so you can kind of use the excuse of, can you teach me the language? I want to talk to you. And it's easy to make friendships just by being naive, I guess.
Yeah, it's asking. I'm like, if you like food and you want to learn about culture and you like to listen, you can make so many friends in Thailand. it would take hours to talk about how different like American culture is than Thailand. But in terms of just at the beginning, reception is, there's a sense in which I would say the working of the practical religion in a lot of Thailand is to be a good person and to not hurt other people.
Kind of like similar in America a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So people, oh, Christians, you must be good people. We're good with you. We're happy you're here, kind of thing. So there was no, I think the barriers start coming when it gets a little deeper. Like, wait, like my son is going to become a Christian, or when it comes to a point of actually making a decision, like I couldn't do that. I have to wait for my parents to pass away so I can do the Buddhist funeral rites for them before I could ever make a decision like that. There's much more practical things that come into it, but in terms of like apologetics or arguing, I'm right, here's why I'm right here, what are your reasons?
Mhm.
That doesn't really happen here. And if you
Can't
go that
do it
route,
here.
you're toast. You don't just come up, I joke around with people. In America, you meet somebody and 5 minutes later you can say, wait, I don't agree with you, that was wrong, here's why it's wrong, and they'll talk back and forth and you have a conversation. But in Thailand, it's very much, you don't do that. You work through building relationships. So
Well, it's a remarkable study in the differences between here and there. It sounds like you've learned I don't know if boundaries is the right word, but you have certainly learned the permissions that you have and where it's wisest to go, because you could go in to a conversation with both guns ablazing and then just the conversation would be over and you would have completely missed an opportunity, right? So
Probably the relationship too.
and I've probably done that a few times. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and you probably had to learn along the way. At the same time, over the course of the last few months, life has brought with it an additional adventure in your world. Now, I should point out, by the way, first of all, one of their children's names is Life. That's not what I'm referring to. I'm referring to life in general, because in many respects, Suzi, it's kind of miraculous that Ben is sitting next to you and talking with us on the program here. Can you kind of give us a feel for what's transpired here in just the last, while many of us have been kind of COVIDed in, you've been dealing with some real serious life and death issues of your own.
Yes.
I don't know if I've heard the story said from your perspective straight up. You want to share?
Yeah, I don't know where to start. What do you think?
You heard a weird sound.
Okay, yeah, I was asleep. Back in September, I went to bed kind of earlier than Ben because he had to finish a paper for master's class that he was doing, his last paper. And about an hour into sleeping, I heard a strange sound like somebody was choking or something, and I rolled over and Ben was there, and I kind of nudged him on the shoulder and I said, Ben, what's wrong? Like, wake up. And he didn't wake up, and I nudged him a little bit harder. He didn't wake up. And then I went over and I turned the light on, and he was laying there, and there was just blood on his pillow. And he was breathing, but very, very strangely, and just laying there. And so I kept trying to nudge him so badly that I like I feel bad now. I was punching him, but punching his legs. I think I thought that I could wake him up if I hit him hard enough. Looking back, I can't believe I did that. But yeah, I didn't know what was going on, and
you called Daniel.
I called our teammate and told him that Ben wasn't responding to me, and he called the hospital and they came, and eventually he did wake up, but he was really he couldn't remember what had happened or anything. So
I'd had a seizure, and they called, the ambulance came, picked me up, and within a few hours we'd done a CT scan, MRI, and everything. The doctor came in. Most of this I don't remember. I heard from Suzi secondhand later, but it said, you have a tumor, you have a brain tumor, and we need to operate. So he said, you can either do it tomorrow or do it next week. And Suzi was like, well, let's get it done. So 24 hours after, basically, after I'd had the seizure, we went in for an operation.
Had you had seizures before? Was this a common occurrence?
No,
No,
never. There was no.
Like zero. I mean, get scientific on you. It's called oligodendroglioma. It's a tumor that's apparently very rare. It starts in the brain, grows very slowly, so your brain has a chance to kind of adapt to it. And in the majority of cases, the first symptom that you see is like a massive seizure. So I never even had headaches before, you know, and so it was completely out of the blue experience.
Our guests here on The Big Impact are Ben and Suzi Collins, and they are serving as missionaries in Thailand. And Suzi, right before the break, you were kind of giving us your angle, your report, your account of what happened with Ben. And as you're discovering these things, and it happened so rapidly, and it wasn't as if he was having a series of seizures over several weeks where you wondered what was happening. This was just once. And all of a sudden, you're in a hospital and giving permission to take him for major surgery. Meanwhile, you got a family around you. You're in another country on the other side of the world. It's okay if you want to admit to just maybe being freaked out at some point here. Were you?
That's the crazy thing is I felt an incredible peace. I remember on the way to the hospital, I was sitting in the front of the ambulance, and the verse that came to my mind was, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And I was just completely comforted by that verse, that I felt God's presence with me, and I didn't at all have a feeling like, why is this happening to me? I'm so upset. And I don't even necessarily believe that would have been wrong if I felt that way, but I think that God must have just protected me from having those feelings. And I did feel very scared and anxious that night, mostly just thinking about my future, because I was 20 weeks pregnant then, and 2 little kids, one of them's 2 years old and the other one is 1.5 years. So obviously all those things were going through my head, but at the same time, the Holy Spirit gave me a really real peace that I am so thankful for, and I just felt like a hug from God in a really crazy situation.
Ben, were you aware or conscious enough to know what was going on, or was everything a blur, or were you able to be part of that decision-making process?
If I was able to be a part of the decision-making process, I don't remember it. I mean, once you have a seizure like that, you're pretty groggy for a long time, but they had me on a lot of medications. And I think I have vague memories of, being in the MRI machine and then them saying, later on, you have a tumor. I'm like, all right, you're going for surgery. Sure. And then the surgery was over. They said it went how we wanted it to go. And I was like, yeah. And then I just slept for a week. So for me, it was, kind of piecing it back together later, where it's kind of sunk in a little bit more for me as we were just doing some more research about, the kind of tumor that I have, or what they thought that I might have before we got the testing done and everything.
Yeah.
So it was Suzi had to bear the bulk of that.
Man, Suzi, you were doing such a powerful job of sharing this story in written form on various Facebook posts that I know a lot of people were following. A lot of people were praying that things would come out with Ben healthy on the other side. My understanding is, and by the way, folks, a reminder, this all happened in September. This isn't 5 years ago. It's not. Someday it'll be a story you can tell about what happened back in 2020 when everything else in the world was falling apart. But for the two of you, this was just a few months ago. And Ben, if I understand correctly, in many ways, you had to relearn how to speak. And I mean, you were kind of touch and go as to what parts of your brain were going to be okay and what parts were maybe going to be damaged. I mean, was all of that explained ahead of time? Was it all a concern? Where were you from a physical and medical standpoint when you came out?
Yeah, I didn't actually, I didn't have to relearn how to speak. There was a lot.
That was part of the miracle.
Yeah, that was part of the miracle. So it just really depends on where it ends up in your brain, and it happened to be a part of my brain that kind of deals more with long-term memory. Although after, I do remember, one thing I remember from the hospital very clearly, the doctor said, I got a lot of it out, I got most of it out. I didn't want to go any further because I didn't want to paralyze you. And he just like said it in passing and went by, and I was just like, I'm sorry, what was the last part you just said? And he was like, nothing. But it, I think it was more looking later on to this particular, it's so rare that there's just not a great amount of information out there and a lot of different sources, so we didn't exactly know where to go next. And it's like, somebody's like, you're going to live for 5 more years. Another place is like, years and years and years and years, you're basically fine. And at first we struggled with, well, okay, hang on, which information's right and what? And I think we had a bit of that afterwards. A lot of the unsureties came, like in the hospital, I didn't know what was going on. I felt like myself after the surgery, but I didn't realize how big of a deal that was. But Suzi, you said you had a moment where when I came back, you kind of could just tell that I was, maybe I said something, you said you could tell that I was okay. I was still, still me.
Because they asked you, who is that? And you're like, it's my wife. But you said it in Thai. You said, it's my wife. So I was just happy that he remembered who I was.
Yeah. Also happy that I still had Thai in there.
Yeah.
That would have been a bummer.
Well, I was just going to ask you if your language learning disconnected, or if anything like that happened as a side effect to all of this. I need to remind myself and our audience that through all of this, all of your communication with doctors is taking place in their language, not in English. And I'm wondering if there was ever a point where the two of you thought, we need to get on a plane, we need to get back to America for this surgery, because for all of our complaints and faults, we've got a pretty good medical system here. Did you ever worry about that, or was there not even time to consider it?
Actually, not really. So we've had all of our babies here, and because we live in Bangkok, actually, that's one of the other things we're so thankful for about the situation, is that many people in this region fly to Bangkok for their medical care. It's actually known as a medical tourist location. So the hospitals here, the private hospitals, in a lot of ways are like catered to tourists. So the medical care is quite good, and the hospital that happens to be very close to our house is one of the best for brain surgery in the whole region.
Yeah. So
that was amazing that happened. And while it is Thai doctors, they are able to communicate in English, although there are definitely some cultural differences that we've had to learn, like between the way the medical system here works and in America. Here, asking questions of your doctors isn't super encouraged, so you don't like question something that the doctor does, and that's tricky for us.
Yeah. I think some of your question maybe hits more towards what's going to happen in the future too.
Yeah.
Because the prognosis is this thing will it will come back. Some people, 10 years, it hasn't started regrowing. Some people, 2 years, it starts regrowing. And so from what we understand, I'll be getting MRIs every 6 months, probably for the rest of my life, 6 months to a year, and checking to see if this thing, is regrowing, and it will usually just come back progressively, slowly worse than it was before. So moving forward, the surgeries here, the actual surgery, I confident in that, but in terms of, do they actually know much about this particular rare, brain tumor where there's more of a coalition, more of funding in America or Europe or something? What would we do in that kind of situation? But I don't want to. I don't want to leave.
Well, what is it? Let's kind of bring this home with some big picture questions, Ben.
Yeah.
What does it do to your faith to have the prospect of a tumor returning hanging over you?
We just had Thanksgiving. We celebrated that a couple of days ago, and my answer, what was I thankful for this year, was my brain tumor. Because in a lot of ways, how many of us live our entire lives just trying to pretend we don't have any limitations, you know, and we get to the point where we someday try to have to accept our limitations and who we are. And I think probably one of the last limitations I was holding on to is like physically, and I can still do this and that. And I mean, I'm not able to drive until March, and who knows when I'll be able to drive exactly again. And so for me to just, again, recognize that I'm limited, I'm finite. And I get a reminder of that every 6 months now, because, you know, if I want to start thinking, oh, I'm doing great, I'm just fine, we have a test coming up in 4 months that's going to check again to see if this thing is regrowing. And there's no guarantee. Most people have said it's amazing that after having the surgery, you know, I mean, the scar goes from here all the way down to here. It's, to be able to be up and around and moving just a couple months after is pretty remarkable. You know, there's not any guarantees that next time will be as easy or as simple, or that I won't lose, you know, part of my speech for a while and have to learn how to use my arm again or so, you know, those kinds of things. So I think on a daily perspective, it's just enjoy what God has given me today. You know, I have what I need today to do what God has for me. And so there's I think a blessing in that. And really just for me personally with young kids, just getting to enjoy
God
them.
enjoys you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Suzi, I want to ask you the same question, obviously from a bit of a different perspective, because the question isn't something that's inside of your head. It's now it's having a family. It's about to grow by another beautiful young child whose name I can't wait for you to share with everybody here. I'm sure you've already picked it out. But what does all of this do, this prospect of MRIs every few months and the unknown? What does that do to your faith walk?
That's a good question. I think I'm still trying to unpack it. I just actually had a sort of counseling debrief about this a few days ago. And I kind of what Ben said, right now we're just looking at it from a perspective of being thankful for the situation that we're in, and at the same time recognizing that there's like bad things that happen in the world and it's okay to recognize that this world is broken, and that includes getting sick. And you know, when Jesus was here, one of the main things he did was healing lots of people, and we can see that it brought Jesus joy to heal people. It brought him joy to see the effects of sin and brokenness reversed in a physical way. And so I think one of the big takeaways I have for my personal faith is to recognize that God sees us in our hurt and pain and sickness, and loves us and feels us in our pain, and is looking forward to the joy of us being healed, whether that's here on earth or when we're with him. And trying to focus more on, I think it's really easy as a missionary especially, but even just as a normal everyday Christian, to focus so much on what God wants us to do, or what should we do, what do we need to do for God, how can we serve him. And that's not a bad question to ask, but I've been increasingly challenged in the last couple of months to focus more on who I am in God, like knowing God and opening up my heart for him to know me. He already knows me so much, but sharing like the deep parts of my heart. And I think going through this grief and this harder time has opened that up more in me, that desire to just know God and not just do stuff for him. Yeah.
That's a great answer, and a very mature answer. I don't know many people would have the maturity to take that perspective on difficulties. It's so cool to hear you kind of say that, especially knowing that in the near future you're gonna have a little baby in your arms. So when's our due date?
January 27th.
Oh, we're right there. Okay, so
We're there.
are you a couple that likes to know gender ahead of time, or do you want to be surprised at the moment of delivery?
Usually we do for the first two, but now we have a boy and a girl, so we said, let's make it a surprise this time. So I get to be the first one to know.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. That's so cool. Well, we're proud of you guys. For those of us who have known the two of you for a while, it's really, really cool to be able to visit with you in your setting. There in the mission field, and there probably are people paying attention to this conversation who are the concept of moving your life to serve the Lord in the other side of the world is probably a very unusual and foreign concept. And for a lot of us, though, we kind of knew, Ben, that this is what you were going to do. We knew this even when you were climbing up into trees in the Upper Peninsula and walking around barefoot when everybody else was wearing shoes. And we're like, what's wrong with this kid? Well, he's got a little bit different makeup to him because of the family heritage. And I'm going to guess that you wouldn't choose to be anywhere else on the planet except for where you are right now.
Yeah, Thailand is great. Being here is great. I would encourage anybody to come visit anytime. Our door's always open. So.